Nesse nono episódio de Block Talks, eu falo com Mehran Hydary, gerente de produtos de blockchain do Innovation Lab da Unicef. Eu sou Maurício Magaldi e esse é o BlockDrops, o primeiro podcast em português sobre blockchain para negócios. As notícias que você ouve aqui não têm qualquer vínculo com o meu trabalho atual, não configuram nenhuma forma de patrocínio, propaganda ou incentivo para o consumo e têm o foco exclusivamente educacional para o mercado. Eu tive a sorte de cruzar com uma matéria sobre a Unicef e o programa de blockchain há alguns dias, e o time da Christina Lomazzo foi muito gentil em indicar o Mehran para falar com a gente sobre o programa e como as coisas funcionam. Então, a entrevista de hoje é em inglês. Então, assim que começar, eu vou mudar para inglês. E no finalzinho eu faço um wrap-up para vocês em português. So guys, switching up to English now, we're going to start this recording with Mehran Hydary from the Unicef Blockchain Workgroup. And he's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Hi, Mehran. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being here, taking the time. Appreciate your taking the time to do this.
Hi, Maurizio. Thank you for having me today on the show. As Maurizio mentioned, my name is Mehran Hydary. I currently work as a product manager at UNICEF's Office of Innovation. UNICEF has been in the blockchain space for about 4 or 5 years now, and essentially my role is very dynamic, but there are 3 things that we focus on. The first one is learning and advocacy of blockchain throughout UNICEF and the broader UN ecosystem. We do a lot of work with our country offices around the world that are also looking to implement emerging tech like blockchain. So if they have questions about how blockchain can be used in their existing processes, our team comes in and advises them and helps them build various solutions. And then the last thing that our team focuses on is we actually have a venture fund or crypto fund. So we are able to make investments in fiat currencies like the US dollar or in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether to startups around the world that are exploring blockchain tech. And so for that, I do a lot of advisory work and collaboration as well.
So let me ask you a few things about the fund first. I think that we'll start with the fund and then we go through how the operation takes place in the other 2 roles that you take. How's the setup? I mean, you mentioned the crypto fund. Is this cryptocurrency based? Is this like a regular investment that like regular people like me can do? How can people support the fund throughout the crypto space? How does that work?
Before I dive into the crypto fund, let me just talk briefly about the venture fund or the innovation fund, as it's sometimes called. Essentially, our team has raised money from governments around the world that are looking to invest in other countries that are looking at emerging tech. And so UNICEF program countries essentially get funding to build and test new solutions so that we can keep pace with tech. Over the last few years, it's been quite crazy, with machine learning and the advances in blockchain, and a lot of our country offices have taken notice. And so the venture fund or innovation fund was set up to make investments of up to 100K in UNICEF country offices or even startups that operate in UNICEF country offices. And essentially, this flexible funding to these early stage innovators allows UNICEF to assess and grow open source technologies that can potentially impact the lives of vulnerable children. That's the venture fund. And now, over the last few years, as we started diving into blockchain specifically, one of the big use cases in the blockchain space is cryptocurrency. And so a lot of our donors started asking, hey, can we actually contribute money in cryptocurrencies because we want to see how UNICEF is actually spending the donations that they're receiving. And so last October 2019 at DevCon 5, we were in Osaka and essentially we had launched the crypto fund. And so when we launched, what we said was the Ethereum Foundation has given us some Bitcoin and they've given us some Ether. And to existing startups that were in our venture fund, we actually gave them additional funding in crypto. And then they use that crypto to pay developers or pay vendors to build out some additional things for their initiative. So that was back in October. And since then, I think like a few weeks ago, we actually invested in a few more startups, again in crypto. So the Ethereum Foundation made another donation of 1,200 Ether, I believe, and we distributed that to 8 additional startups in countries around the world. And so as we scaled the crypto fund, we wanted to operate very similar to how we've made investments through the venture fund in fiat. And so we're working towards that because, people around the world are looking to donate in Ether. In terms of getting involved, Unicef France, for example, collects donations, not just from corporate partners. We actually have individual blockchain wallets set up. And so you can send Ether, you can send Bitcoin, all of that gets pooled in their crypto wallets. And we've received that. And we're looking for ways to spend that through the crypto fund in our program countries or the startups that we work with.
That's a very fun and innovative way to actually move the funds around and make them count, right? Now, in that regard, how do you select or how do you prioritize which are or the regions or the types of challenges that are being tackled by these startups that are funded through the venture fund for new technologies, specifically for blockchain in this case?
We actually have a call open right now. The deadline is for July 26, 2020. And essentially, we look for companies that are right now developing blockchain-based software solutions in relation to finance, in relation to connecting groups together, if they're using the technology to empower people in their community with new tools using the emerging tech. So those are some of the big areas. And so, from a finance perspective, are there solutions that enable people to use, earn, and hold cryptocurrencies? Are there tools that are in place to enable people to access decentralized financial instruments that are being built by the blockchain community? Are there systems in place to make financial systems more transparent? So things like that from a finance perspective. From a connect perspective, we're looking at solutions that capture decisions, hold people accountable in a very transparent manner. So there's decentralized autonomous organizations and platforms that are being built where decisions by various stakeholders can be validated, through blockchains and being able to capture data in ways that are transparent where people weren't willing to be transparent before. So if there's any startups working on that, we're looking for that as well. And then finally, from like the empower perspective, can we engage people that are traditionally not engaged because the platforms didn't exist or the technology didn't exist to remotely get people agreeing on something, collecting information and rewarding these people for the information that they provide. So are there solutions that are based on blockchain that empower this type of functionality? Is currently what our blockchain call is looking for, just to give some examples.
You mentioned that you have invested in a few and then there's a second wave and now there's this opening for new startups to apply. Are there any cases specifically from these cycles that have already scaled up in terms of maturing to the point where they became the centerpiece of the ecosystem where they're operating in these countries that where they have been invested in, say in the first or the second wave? Are these startups or any of these startups that have already matured to the point where they are now operating independently of additional fund, or they have reached a level of maturity where they're now walking on their own feet?
So I'll mention two. This is from our initial blockchain cohort. One of them is named Prescripto. They're a Mexican-based startup that looked to digitize how prescriptions were being captured using blockchain technology. And so similar to the double spending problem in Bitcoin, where Bitcoin solved the issue where people could spend digital currencies more than once, people were also doing that with prescriptions. They were getting a note from their doctor, they were going to multiple pharmacies and getting that same prescription fulfilled. And so Prescripto, what they did was they're like, okay, let's digitize parts of this, leverage a blockchain-esque system to then prevent double spending of prescriptions. And so I think right now, last time I checked, they have over 200,000 prescriptions that have been run through their platform in Latin America. They did receive some additional funding as well from the Ethereum Classic Labs. And so they're currently working on a web and mobile solution to facilitate that process. Another startup that went through our fund as well is OS City. They're also based out of Latin America. And essentially what they're doing is they're leveraging various public blockchains to store certificates. And the types of certificates that they actually store are government issued certificates. So if a license for businesses has been issued, or if food and safety checks have been done and another certificate's been sent to that, they've created a very simple product to capture that certificate on a blockchain platform. And so that way the blockchain platform keeps the certificate publicly accessible. And so this is actually something that a lot of governments have been exploring. And because of that, they've actually worked with 4 or 5 countries in Latin America right now to digitize certain parts of their business licensing processes for a variety of different use cases. Yeah, those are 2 cool ones that I like to talk about.
That's really impressive. Now, thinking about these 2 cases or the previous waves of investment that the fund did, what is the expectations for those startups in terms of not only maturing but also scaling up and reaching their full potential? How do you measure success? And I understand, we all have to understand that this is under the umbrella of UNICEF. So there's a few drivers for what we can call success, which is different than the regular business world. How do you guys measure success of those investments in terms of the solutions that these startups have been providing to their own ecosystem? How do you guys identify that this has been successful, this is the path forward, and this is what we're going to look for into the next waves of startups for the fund?
I think the biggest focus of our venture fund and crypto fund is when we do invest in companies, we actually want them to create open source solutions, right? So if a company, for example, we have another startup called Statwig based out of India. What they built was a supply chain solution to make the vaccine tracking from supplier to when it actually reaches a child or a person more transparent. And so they're working with UNICEF India to figure out, what steps are actually needed and how can we improve the software to really ensure that the transparency that they're trying to bring to consumers can exist using blockchain. So now, once you prove that out there, and so while startups work with us after they get funding, we make sure that they make open source software. We help them connect with various UNICEF country offices around the world. And hopefully by the end of the time that they have with UNICEF, they've done a few successful pilots or pilots that they can learn from, and then improve on that. And then once they get it to a point where it works, for example, we want to leverage that solution in other UNICEF program countries. I think that is like a sign of success for us. So if there's a startup that's working in country A, can you leverage a similar model in country B? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but at least we would have the tools to facilitate something simple. And UNICEF's main advantage is that we have 130 country offices around the world. So can we leverage these open source solutions and really pump them out for people that need them to use them?
I think the fact that, under the UNICEF umbrella, you guys are focusing on specific drivers. I mean, in the briefing, we were just speaking about the SDGs, which is something that I recurrently bring about here in the podcast. And the fact that you guys are actually prioritizing or just making straight open source solutions which would serve broad use cases in multiple geographies is really remarkable, and it's a testament in the level of usefulness and applicability of blockchain technologies, plural, in the current state of things around the world, right? So that is really commendable in terms of how you have approached this. Now, you laid out 3 areas of your work, Mehran, when we're talking about the fund, we talked about the solutions and the startup process, but you also described a little bit of your day-to-day with these projects. How do you play your role around these guys? How they use your expertise and your efforts to really expedite what they're trying to do? How you collaborate? How do you work with these guys since they're everywhere around the world?
I can tell you there's a ton of calls at odd hours throughout the day, not only for myself, but the people that I work with, because it's truly an international organization. We have, vendors from Asia, we have other vendors in Latin America, we have people that work with us from Europe. And so sometimes we're all trying to get on a call to collaborate and drive products forward. And I think the role that I've come to play here at UNICEF and in my previous engagement at Deloitte as well, where I actually got into blockchain, was, okay, Mehran, tech, product, and how to talk to people. So leverage that to make things easier for everyone to understand. And so right now, a lot of the work that we do is explaining what blockchain is. Once we get people understanding what blockchain is and what are the things that they can do with it, like setting up a wallet, using tokens, introducing transparency, then a lot of people are like, in our country offices or in our startups, it's like, okay, how does that relate to things that Unicef does? Or if it's not within Unicef, then other UN agencies. Once we figured that out, then it's like, okay, now we need to build something, or maybe we need to create a paper or do a presentation. So then translating that data in whatever, maybe we need to make product or business requirements for something that we might build. Maybe we need to do a very technical presentation to an IT team in one of the UN agencies. And so I'd say like my main contribution to the team is being able to float between business and tech in all these different capacities is where I'll leave it. I did do a lot of development at Unicef and in my previous engagement as well. And I think that really allows me to understand, what we need technically, what does that mean from a business perspective? How do you communicate that to designers, which is, I think, very exciting to be a part of.
It's multidisciplinary for sure. Yeah, like blockchain itself, right? If we tend to think about blockchain more than the programmable data infrastructure it really is, then we end up with a bunch of other stuff, crippling our way through a real solution. So glad that you're able to bridge that with the multiple skills. You mentioned a couple things that I wanted to talk about, which is open source, right? If the solutions are open source, you mentioned public blockchains and the cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. Is there any particular criteria, technical criteria for selecting these startups, whether do they have to be using like public blockchains only? Can they be using, say, other types of still open source blockchain technologies, but that are maybe private permissioned? I know that there's this long running debate whether a permissioned blockchain is whether a real blockchain, but regardless of that debate and controversy around it, how do you prioritize or select specific technologies for those startups? Are they already selected by the startups? Do you guys do any specific recommendations based off of the use cases that they're trying to tackle? How does the process work?
So from a startup perspective, our general eligibility criteria asks the startups to already have a prototype in place. And so because we use the Innovation Fund as like a learning vehicle for our team as well, we're actually very flexible in terms of what startups come to us with. And so, from our previous cohort, we've had startups that worked with public blockchains like Bitcoin and Dash. We've had other startups come to us and they're working with private blockchains or permission blockchains per se, like multi-chain, and they eventually want to do this on a public blockchain. So I think as long as they have, an intention to leverage public blockchains or open source structures to roll out their software to as many people as can be, I think we're open to whatever solutions they propose, because it helps Unicef understand what are the implications for using, something like Hyperledger versus Ethereum versus something that's completely private. And then each of the startups have different ways of organizing or using the blockchain. And so really right now, like, the blockchain industry is still in its infancy, and the startups just help us get all these different perspectives very quickly. And so I don't think we're super prescriptive. If they have a prototype of the solution and they have this intention of making a part of that open source, then we're good to go on our side.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's super early on. We don't have any really major established tech on the blockchain space. I think all of these is largely, I wouldn't say open for grabs, but we're still learning the implications of applying blockchain technology to real world applications, right? So I think, and I agree with you, I think the more open we are to this, the better it will be, the faster we'll learn about how, what the implications are of using blockchain for whatever specific use case. So that's interesting and of course pretty clever to tackle in that scenario. Now, this is all great, but I'm pretty sure that there are challenges on the actual execution of these projects, not only because they are being doing remotely based on your geolocation, which is a single one right now. What are the other challenges you see from these startups? Because we're talking about most likely emerging countries where the challenges are bigger for people to have even enough education to be able to understand the technology and the social and real world implications of it. What are the challenges you see are the most prominent on the program and the startups themselves, and how are you guys helping them tackle that?
I would say each country actually imposes its own unique set of challenges, right? But then the types of challenges are fairly similar. So it's like there's tech literacy, there's access to various types of mobile devices, there's connectivity issues that might be in play. And so a lot of the startups that we work with, some of them do account for a lot of this, right? Where they'll educate people through the platform, or they'll work, or the software will work in areas with low connectivity. And so we've started accumulating like types of problems that might come up. But then each country is so unique, and each government has done a variety of different things to accommodate tech. It's hard for us to say like, oh, you work in this country, this is going to be your problem set. You worked in that country, and this is going to be your other problem set. And so we're working through that together. If we have connections in governments or UN agencies that can help expedite, learning or access to tech, we leverage that. But I think a lot of the countries that we work in that we haven't worked in before, from a tech perspective, it's an unknown to us. And so we dive in together with the startups, and we're very hands-on to make sure that the startups have what they need to do what they want to do through the fund. In addition to that, I think there's a lot of implications from like accounting, legal, and operational perspectives as well that sometimes countries, startups, and even the team that I'm on, we don't foresee. And so they pop up and you're like, oh, I didn't know there was this legal consideration here or this accounting catch there. And so it's very interesting to be able to tackle this from an international organization perspective so that we can enable the teams and startups that we work with.
Yeah, there's always a tax caveat somewhere that nobody, predicted. And now you
Exactly.
have to handle that and incorporate that piece on your solution because otherwise it can't fly, right? So I think I agree with you. I mean, I don't have the breadth of experience in multiple countries, but I would assume there are familiarities in terms of the challenges by, doing multiple waves of this type of investments. You will be able to start predicting which are going to be the challenges depending on the problem space that these startups are trying to tackle in each of these geographies, I would assume, right? So that is interesting that this is an ongoing effort between UNICEF and the countries to actually move these things forward. Then you have a learning that you can really introduce into the next wave, which is always evolutionary and awesome. So that's pretty great. Now, when I think about the program, and this is certainly really new, but in the long run, what are the expectations or the goals that the program has established for itself? Is there any end game to this? Is this something that is like we're going to run until this thing is interesting, or we're going to run until we have funding for this? How is the strategy for this? How do you guys have laid out the long term? Because again, we're early on in the early life of blockchain technology in general. Is this something that when blockchain is commonplace everywhere like the internet is, then this ceases to make sense? What is the long-term strategy for the blockchain unit in UNICEF? How do you guys see that playing out throughout time?
So I'll mention a few other things that we're doing in parallel that I think will tie into this. The first thing is, I mentioned that we do a lot of learning and advocacy through the team. And so we have this brand called Surge, Surge, and it's essentially an immersive series of events that invites youth to learn new skills and understand where blockchain can actually play a role in the communities that they grow up in. And so we've done both technical and non-technical workshops with blockchain for South Africa, Thailand, Mexico. And the idea is we want to introduce blockchain as a technology and have them think through like how this technology can be used in the areas that they grew up in. Now, what would be really cool to see is, as they, say we organize a learning event or a hackathon of some kind in that country, and they take the learnings that we share with them, they work with their community to build a solution, and eventually they have a platform that they can register as a business And then maybe that group that does that can apply to our innovation fund, right? So that's kind of like something we're working towards right now through the Surge platform. The longer term, I'd say, perspective through the innovation fund and the crypto fund is to tie into these two broader initiatives that we have within the Office of Innovation. The first one is called GIGA, and GIGA is an initiative to connect every school around the world to the internet. It was a project that was launched by Unicef and ITU, which is the International Telecom Union, in September of 2019. And the idea was that if we can get every school connected to the internet, it would imply that every young person would have access to information, opportunity, and choice. And so with GIGA, as we kind of work towards that, once GIGA is in place, we have another initiative that is also running in parallel called the Digital Public Goods Initiative. And so this is actually a pool of open source technologies that can be leveraged by people around the world. So, as the Innovation Fund produces more open source tech, the idea is we want them to funnel into the Digital Public Goods Initiative so that schools that are connected through GIGA will have access to this repository of open source tech that then people can potentially use to solve issues in their own area. So that's kind of like the long-term strategic vision for GIGA, Digital Public Goods, and the Innovation Fund.
I love how you guys are seeing this to be really ingrained, not only into the general public, but also in the sense of embedding this into education. I think this is so critical. And I mean, I'm based in Brazil, and we see the amount of educational gap and the differences in, the society it sort of enables. So if you can bridge that gap and bridge that with technology that permeates education in general, then the social gap would certainly be still big, because this is like ages old, but still working towards, bridging that gap with technology. I think that's probably the best shot we have at doing so, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's still gaps in people's understanding of how the internet works. And so I think the idea behind Surge is to make sure that this time, as the technology at the scale of blockchain gets introduced or, penetrates our lives, people know what they can do. They see the use cases, they see the problems that it can solve in their community, so that, this time maybe the gap between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world isn't as crazy as it is now.
Definitely, yeah. I think that if we're gonna have any hype about blockchain or blockchain technologies in general, let that hype be in doing actual good for the world, and not financial speculation type hype, which we have to deal with right now. So I think that the fund and the program is certainly making its part account, providing the hype in the right direction right now. So yeah, no, thanks for that. So Mehran, any parting words, any words of encouragement for our listeners that are interested in the work that you guys are doing with UNICEF? Anything you want to add to and tell these guys to be more interested in what you guys are doing?
Technology at first seems very intimidating, and it appears that way because it combines so many disciplines into this one solution that allows people to share information without trusting people who manage that infrastructure. Once you start getting deeper into the technology and understanding, like, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean for the financial industry? What does that mean for the social impact space? What does it mean? I think there's a lot of opportunity that is currently untapped from a design perspective, a developer perspective, from a business perspective, that even now people can jump into and kind of leverage. They can use it to launch their career and really redefine the space still. I'm seeing new solutions come into play every week, every day, whether it's from a social impact perspective or something completely different. And that's why our team at Unicef Innovation exists, because we see the technology evolving, we're seeing the impact that it's having around the world, and we want more people to jump in and figure out how this tech can be used. And we have the programs in place like the Innovation Fund to fund those ideas and opportunities. And so even though the technology seems scary, I highly encourage people to just spend a week, a month, or a year just diving in, figuring out what it is so that they can leverage it to the best of its ability. And programs like the Innovation Fund and programs outside of UNICEF as well are there to fund and grow those ideas. So jump in is what I'm saying.
Então, pessoal, tá aí a entrevista com o Mehran Hydary, muito gentil, contando aí pra gente um pouco de como é o dia a dia dele no trabalho de Innovation Lab com blockchain, os desafios que ele enfrenta nos diferentes países que a Unicef atende com esse programa. Ele também conta um pouco sobre como as startups são selecionadas, quais são os focos em relação ao tipo de solução oferecida por essas startups e como também a Unicef seleciona esses trabalhos para serem investidos. Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado dessa entrevista. Eu espero poder trazer mais informações sobre o trabalho da Unicef. Você pode ouvir o BlockDrops Podcast nas plataformas Numis, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcast, Spotify e Anchor FM. Entre em contato conosco através do e-mail blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, no Instagram BlockDrops Podcast e no Twitter BlockDropsPod.